Sunjoy, not just because you're, oh, sorry, I was thinking of ORF too much.
Yes.
Not just because you're sitting closest to me, but I want to ask you about continuity and change. There are things that change, there are things that never really do. How would you define them? What do you think has changed, what do you think has not?
So let me begin by firstly kind of commenting on what you just said. One of the biggest problems today in the current global order is the inability of the United Nations Security Council to fulfill its role. It's essentially responsible for maintaining peace, security, and committing itself to the broad notion of development, and it's utterly failed. And the one clear reason why it's failed is it's really refused to reform itself over the past 8 decades or so. So the real question is, do you throw the baby out with the bathwater? The answer is no. I think it's a very good system, and simply because it has certain infirmities, it doesn't mean that the current global order should be challenged. But it's very clear that there has been no reform since 1965. The last time that there was any reform at the United Nations in the Security Council was when the non-permanent membership went up from 6 to 10, and that was way back in 1965. There's been no change since then. At the heart of the problem is the fact that there are veto-wielding powers, 5 of them, who don't see eye to eye. Now, they're supposed to work together, even a modicum of cooperation as they did during the Cold War. But today, in this particular era of major power conflict and confrontation, they've utterly failed to do so. So let me just end that capsule by saying the United Nations Security Council is hoist on its own petard. Unless they willingly give up their privileged status and move in for reforms, you're not going to see much of a change there. The second point I want to make is that we must not discount history and geography when it comes to the modern battlefield. And there is a certain continuity. History, the baggage of history is very important. But for me, geography is extraordinarily important. And let me give 3 quick examples. You are aware of Sir Halford Mackinder's heartland theory, and he had emphasized the importance of the heartland. By the way, that's the heartland where a lot of the action is taking place right now in the European theater in Ukraine. And he had spoken about pacifying the rimland in order to be able to dominate the world island and so on and so forth. And we are seeing some of that playing before our very eyes. The second example of geography is what the US strategic thinker Alfred Mahan had said about the Indian Ocean. He had said that whoever dominates the Indian Ocean will dominate Asia, and the Indian Ocean is key to the 7 oceans. And that is playing itself out in the Indo-Pacific today, where you see a country like China, for example, having grown exponentially on the economic front, also militarizing, and there is a fair bit of perception throughout Asia about coercion being used by the People's Republic of China, and many countries have misgivings about it. And the third example I want to give is about the South China Sea, where again geography plays a very important role. In 1933, there was a French admiral called Georges Maker, who traveled to 9 islands in the South China Sea and planted the French flag, France then being a dominant power alongside Japan in the South China Sea. He planted the French flag on 9 islands. And in Beijing, there was a self-taught geographer in the Foreign Office. His name was Mr. Pai Mei-chu. Mr. Pai Mei-chu took notice of what the French were doing, and he said that all geography and map making must be in the service of the nation. It must be out of love for your country that you draw maps and make maps. And he made such a map. That's the map that was published in 1936 with the cow's tongue, the U-shaped line, the 9-dash line as we call it today. Fast forward and you find that all these 3 geographies are experiencing a great deal of tumult. So geography is extremely important.
Can I just take the opportunity to make a very quick comeback to you, and I would like a quick answer, precisely because you're from outside of the EU. We like to say in the EU, since we also speak about a world order that's eminently European, that we have overcome history and geography. The EU has had a very troubled history, which comes from a complicated geography. Do you feel that that is the case, and is that something that the rest of the world still aspires to? Or is this just a very isolated phenomenon both in time and in space?
Look, you know, chaos and order are cyclical in nature. You will never have a period of time in history where there will be order for, you know, all times to come in a perennial manner, nor will you have chaos perennially. So this is, you know, sort of cyclical in nature. And I would say that Europe at one point of time gave the impression, like Southeast Asia, that it had resolved all its history and geography, the differences and the friction among themselves. But 7 decades later, I would say that the fundamental you know, foundation of Europe has been shaken up. And I do not believe that the world would look to Europe today for any great example of seamless integration.
Thank you very much. Sujan, you were the first one who opened the question of the institutions that are inadequate to what we're discussing here. Do you see a way forward? Because the question immediately following what Stephanie said is, who's going to do that? We need to build the institutions first before we actually build the framework.
So I think it's a major problem with regard to arms control also, because we just had the treaty for the prohibition of nuclear weapons negotiated kind of in the UN General Assembly, whereas all 9 nuclear weapons powers stayed out of that, including India, because they believe that it's not just the subject matter, but also the processes that are important, and that arms negotiations cannot take place here, there, and everywhere. It's supposed to take place in the CD. So that's one, the Conference on Disarmament in Geneva. The other side of the problem is that there are many such treaties that have been created, but not really brought to fruition. I mean, we are out of the CTBT, India, but the United States of America has signed but not ratified the CTBT. So what good has that done? But let me come back to AI and lethal autonomous weapon systems, because this is a discourse about the changing nature of warfare and both technology and traditionalism in the battlefield. Every age, every war has had a revolution in military affairs. You saw how the advent of the machine gun changed trench warfare and the massing of troops across open fields in Europe. That changed during the First World War. The Second World War saw, for example, aerial blitzkrieg or mechanized warfare shaping the nature of war. The Gulf War brought in smart bombs and things like that. Now what we are seeing in the last several years is firstly a move towards smarter sensors, smarter integration, network-centric warfare, but that still has the human being behind that technology. It only shortens the what we call the sensor-to-shooter kill chain. But what we are now seeing with the advent of artificial intelligence integrated with the concept of lethal autonomous weapon system is that the human being is out of the equation. To me, it dehumanizes war. It also creates a somewhat unethical means to wage war indiscriminately, kill the largest number of people. In fact, there'll be no fog of war. There'll be no friendly fire. There'll be no blue on blue, because AI is going to be so smart about all this. So therefore, the observe, orient, decide, act, the ODA chain in war is going to be heavily curtailed. There'll be no more Rommels. There'll be no Douglas MacArthurs. There'll be no Montgomerys. There'll be no such great, Patton, George Patton, etc., generals that we will talk about, because the emotional, makeup of the commander or the soldier, the character of leadership is no longer relevant. And so we are entering a very dangerous phase of warfare, where this kind of technology is going to create a warfare of the type that we haven't even dreamt of so far.
Sujan?
I'd say that the nature of warfare is changing very rapidly. It's not just the state that's involved. We've seen examples of a combination of state and non-state actor acting in tandem. There are examples galore, whether it's Ukraine, whether it is West Asia. We have seen this happening. So the problem here is that special forces will always be required, and not necessarily to act in hybrid situations, but also to take out targets that are more to do with, for example, terrorist centers or in anti-piracy operations, to help with, for example, global shipping, in cases where hostages are taken, and this is not necessarily only for your national ends. Special forces are required to tackle global threats also. But more than simply a non-state actor, today we are also seeing the advent of the private sector and big tech in warfare. One clean example is, for example, Elon Musk and the Starlink system. Now, it may all appear to be very helpful to the war and all that, but it is actually setting a new trend that you will have, for example, an individual who is capable of saying that I will give the technology in certain circumstances, but if it's your intention to retake Crimea, I will not necessarily share the same Starlink facility. So it's not just state, non-state, but now big tech and private individuals entering the fray. That makes it very complex.
Thank you so much.